Imagine stepping into a village where silence feels heavier than thunder, where whispers never escape the crooked fences and every path leads to a house that hides more than it shows. In the middle of that forgotten land stands a barn, its wooden walls rotten, its doors chained not to keep intruders out, but to keep secrets in. For generations, the women of a single bloodline were sealed behind those planks, denied light, denied freedom, denied choice. Their world was the smell of hay and damp wood, their lullabies, the cries of hunger and despair. Mothers gave birth only to daughters who would never know the sky, their lives predetermined by a curse written not in ink, but in flesh. The villagers knew they heard the muffled cries at night. They saw shadows at the broken windows, yet no one dared to intervene. Fear chained their tongues as tightly as the iron that locked the barn. Every family carries history, but this one carried a prison, a bloodline twisted into itself, again and again, until the faces began to change, until language was replaced with grunts, until names were lost to silence. And you are about to witness the story they wanted, buried, a tale of women reduced to ghosts of human memory, hidden away as if shame itself could build walls around their existence. But the truth has a way of breaking locks, even the ones forged by centuries of silence. The story begins in the hills of West Virginia, a land where poverty ran deeper than rivers, and where families clung to each other, not only for survival but for bloodlines that never spread beyond their own walls. In that isolation, the women of this family became prisoners of their own heritage, chained not by iron alone, but by tradition, whispered from one broken generation to the next. Fathers became husbands, brothers became fathers, and daughters became mothers in a cycle that never allowed new blood to enter or new voices to question. The barn became their world, a cradle of sorrow that birthed children who carried not only the marks of inbreeding, but also the silence of those who dared not speak. The villagers called it a curse, but curses do not appear from nowhere. They are written by human hands, by choices drenched in secrecy, and by the refusal of outsiders to intervene. The cries from that barn echoed through decades, muffled by the walls, yet loud enough to haunt the valley. The women were not seen as individuals. They were shadows trapped in the repetition of blood and pain, and each daughter born carried the weight of her mother's fate. Like a wheel turning endlessly, their lives spun without direction, without escape, while the world beyond the mountains moved forward, leaving them forgotten in time. The barn became more than a prison. It became a symbol of how silence can be more brutal than chains. Inside that sealed barn, time felt different. Daylight slipped through cracks in the wood, painting the dirt floor with faint golden lines, but nothing could pierce the heaviness that hung in the air. The women lived in cycles of survival, their hands rough from work, their voices quiet from fear, and their eyes hollow from years of repetition. They did not dream of freedom, because freedom was a word they had never truly known. They were raised to believe that the outside world was filled with danger, and that only within the family could they find safety. Yet, that safety was nothing but another name for control. The children born within those walls carried faces that mirrored one another so closely it seemed as if the same soul was trapped again and again in different bodies. Each child grew with strange habits, some barely speaking, others producing animal-like sounds that echoed the growls heard by strangers who dared to approach the barn. Locals would whisper about the growling family hidden deep in the woods, but whispers never became rescue because no one wanted to step inside and face what had been created. The barn smelled of sweat, smoke, and despair, the kind of air that never truly refreshed lungs but weighed them down. The women carried their sorrow in silence, their suffering unrecorded in history books, their names erased by secrecy and shame. What remained was not only the story of survival, but the reflection of what happens when a family is left alone in shadows for too long. Every detail in the barn was carefully designed to break the mind and bend the will. Jeremiah wrote instructions for every task. Meals were planned with precision. Chores were distributed in a cycle that never allowed rest. Even play was calculated to teach obedience and suppress curiosity. The women learned that asking questions was dangerous, that thinking beyond the walls meant punishment, that strange isolation created patterns of behavior that psychology could only begin to explain. They developed subtle signals to communicate without attracting attention. Small taps, gestures hidden in plain sight. This secret language became their lifeline and their prison at the same time. Each night Jeremiah or his brother would walk through the barn, their presence a reminder that no thought of escape could exist unchecked. Pregnancies were treated as experiments. The weak were removed or left to die, while the strong were nurtured and monitored with cold precision. Every woman became both a vessel and a subject in a living system designed to purify bloodlines and record results. Those who resisted were punished with deprivation, isolation, or threats that only reinforced the ideology that the family's purpose was sacred and superior. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with expectation, teaching the women that the only world that mattered was within chains and boards. Outside life was irrelevant and dangerous. As decades passed, the cycle repeated itself, unnoticed by neighbors, unaware of the horror next door. The women internalized the narrative of destiny. They were the chosen carriers of purity, conditioned to obey and endure the invisible hand of control. Halfway through the story comment, now twice the words, "Purity is power," to seal your understanding of this descent into hidden knowledge and engage with the reality that most men never confront. By the time Jeremiah's plan reached its peak, the women had no concept of a normal life. Their minds had been molded by isolation, routine, and fear. They measured time only by light and sound, by the footsteps of their captors and the rhythm of chores. Their bodies carried the marks of generations of manipulation, deformities, and strengths, carefully recorded and categorized by Jeremiah like data points in a living experiment. Education was sparse yet meticulous. Sarah emerged as a rare exception, self-taught through salvaged books, teaching herself to read and later instructing the others. She became the keeper of knowledge, the quiet rebel hidden within the system that sought to control her. All outside contact was forbidden. No newspapers, no radios, no signs that the world beyond the barn existed. Every story told was filtered through the patriarch's warped lens, apocalypse myths, warnings of sickness, radiation, and collapse were used to justify every restriction. Every fear instilled a deeper obedience. Every lesson reinforced the isolation and the ideology. The women learned survival in darkness and obedience as sacred duty. Yet somewhere beneath the conditioning, curiosity stirred a flicker of awareness. They began to notice inconsistencies, gaps in stories, whispers that hinted at life beyond the farm. They began to question, though, subtly knowing that outward expression could mean punishment. Each pregnancy was catalogued meticulously. Genetic outcomes predicted and recorded. Weakness was seen as natural selection, the strong cultivated like crops under strict supervision. Everything was clinical and personal at once. The bloodlines a currency, the women vessels and observers of the system. Jeremiah's notebooks revealed chilling calculations generations ahead. Every union, every characteristic planned to refine, isolate, and control. They had been raised in a world without mercy or escape, and yet they survived. They learned resilience in the face of systematic cruelty. The psychological scars were deep, but so was their capacity for adaptation. The human mind bending but not breaking. The barn was both cage and laboratory, a monument to obsession, to hidden knowledge, and the lengths a single man could go to reshape life itself. When the authorities finally breached the barn, the world saw only fragments of what had been hidden for decades. The 7 women emerged into light for the first time in their lives, blinking against the sun and air and freedom. Their eyes carried the vacant expression of generations molded by isolation. Yet behind it flickered a fragile awareness that had survived countless abuses. Every step into the outside world was disorienting and terrifying, yet liberating. The psychological evaluation revealed a complex tapestry of trauma, resilience, and adaptation. They had learned to navigate fear as a language to survive, and now had to unlearn obedience to cruelty. The medical discoveries were staggering: genetic markers of extreme consanguinity, deformities rarely seen in modern populations, and health conditions the likes of which most doctors would never encounter. The story spread across the nation and ignited a collective horror and fascination. Yet beyond the headlines lay a deeper question about human nature, the allure of control and the power one mind can exercise over others without oversight. The barn was not just a site of abuse, it was a symbol of obsession, secrecy, and the distortion of science to justify cruelty. Scholars and psychologists pored over Jeremiah's notebooks, tracing his thought process, a dangerous blend of self-taught genetics, misinterpreted religion, and conspiracy. The diaries revealed his philosophy of purification, a vision where suffering was a necessary precursor to a stronger lineage. The women themselves became the living testament of the cost of isolation and ideological fanaticism. Their survival depended on the very lessons imposed to break them, yet they carried within them the seeds of awareness, growth, and transformation. The rehabilitation process was painstaking. Daily routines, rebuilt from scratch. Education introduced sensory experiences gradually and always, under vigilant care. Every success measured in hours and days, each emotional breakthrough a battle won against decades of conditioning. At this midpoint, comment now twice. Purity does not justify the cruelty to solidify your awareness and anchor your presence in the story. This is not just history. It is a mirror reflecting what happens when knowledge without ethics is left unchecked, when obsession overrides humanity, and when control becomes the highest law. The aftermath of the Blackwood Barn revealed the fragility of human oversight and the power of isolation to warp morality. The 7 women gradually reclaimed fragments of life stripped from them, learning sunlight and movement and sound as tools of restoration. Their minds were fragile but adaptable, their bodies scarred but resilient. Medical specialists and psychologists documented progress daily. Cognitive exercises taught reading and writing practical skills reintroduced one step at a time. The world watched as survivors emerged from the shadows, their very existence a testament to endurance and the horrors of unchecked secrecy. The legal consequences were severe. Jeremiah sentenced to perpetual imprisonment, Joseph serving decades, his complicity shaped by coercion and indoctrination. The court's recognition of their crimes highlighted the extremity of deliberate manipulation across generations. Yet, even as justice was served, the scars remained. The Blackwood case catalyzed new laws for monitoring, extreme home isolation, and homeschooling protocols emerged, reflecting the urgent need for community oversight and protection. The academic and medical communities gained unprecedented insight into extreme consanguinity and the effects of prolonged social deprivation. Each woman became both patient and teacher, sharing experiences for research education and advocacy. Their voices reshaped understanding of trauma resilience and survival. Sarah emerged as a symbol of strength, using her story to prevent future horrors. The barn itself was demolished, replaced by a memorial honoring endurance and warning against the perils of secrecy and fanaticism. The story endures as a cautionary tale of isolation, obsession, and distorted ideology, yet it also illuminates human adaptability, the capacity to heal and reclaim autonomy against all odds. For those who follow this narrative carefully, the lesson is more than history, it is a mirror. It forces reflection on morality, knowledge, and the consequences of unbridled control. It challenges men to question authority, obsession, and the unseen structures that influence life around them. It reminds us that even in the darkest recesses of human design, there is potential for insight, growth, and redemption. If you have followed until now, comment twice. Purity does not justify the cruelty, and anchor your awareness in the knowledge shared here. Let this story imprint vigilance and awareness in your mind, and let it serve as a reminder that darkness is not always external. Sometimes it is cultivated within systems, isolation, and secrecy. But human resilience always finds a way through every barrier, every cage, and every imposed shadow.